AI's kind of dumb. Well, duh. Of course it's dumb.
And welcome to this episode of Human After All. I am delighted to introduce you to Cristina DiGiacomo, who is the founder of 10 plus 1, blending AI ethics, philosophy with real world leadership to help CAIOs, CEOs, and CISOs to innovate in AI in a sustainable way. With a background in corporate philosophy and years of guiding curious professionals, she inspires organizations and individuals to embrace thoughtful growth. Christina is the published author and a frequent speaker on the wisdom in the age of technology. Christina, I'm delighted to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Juliette. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
So, you spent 25 years in tech before deep diving into philosophy. Can you take us back to the moment when you realized something was missing in the AI conversation?
Yeah, it was this. So, ChatGPT had come out and everyone was like all over it. And I was actually able to also use it myself and start experimenting with different AI models. And I was really, really into it. And I can't say that this was a conscious thing, but it was more like this feeling of like, okay, when are we all going to get on the same page about this? Jeffrey Hinton had one approach to it, one point of view around it. Ray Kurzweil has one point of view around it. Reid Hoffman had one point of view around it, and all were sort of sharing their perspectives, and they all were pretty much like in direct conflict to each other. And all of them were also espousing their ideas in different styles and with different passions. And I just sort of felt like, okay, when are we going to start talking about our place with AI? And when are we really going to start gathering around this idea, around this really epic evolution, not only in technology, but potentially for society and humanity? So I just instinctively felt this like waiting, and uh and and it was only getting worse, to be honest. The rhetoric, the hype, the fear mongering, and I saw the effect that it was having on sort of the greater, the greater mass of people, who were terrified, genuinely terrified, or hostile, or misunderstanding, and a lot of misinformation. And it was getting a bit overwhelming. The noise was getting a bit overwhelming. And I just felt like, wait a second, we really need to, first of all, calm down. And second, really educate people um, on what's actually happening with, let's bring a little wisdom into all of this and be rational. And so for me, it really sort of hit when I was observing people who were, experts and really experimenting with this stuff on a deep level, putting out conflicting messages and causing a lot of confusion and a lot of angst.
So, in
So that was really what I was feeling.
So, in terms of your background being philosophy, how did you kickstart that approach? So, looking at AI, but bringing in philosophy, why was that where you started? Why do you think philosophy is an important start point for discussing this?
So first, when I started studying and practicing philosophy in my career, I found that it was extremely beneficial if you thought about it as a strategic conversation. Philosophy encourages us to ask, why are we doing this? What happens if we do? What happens if we don't? And just really having those sort of thoughtful conversations and discussions. And so I was already using philosophy in my career and in how I stewarded ideas through an organization, how I ran my teams, how I also engaged with my work. So I had already had, almost a decade's worth of experience in the power of philosophical thinking, but also philosophical action in my career. And so when all of this was going on, when AI first came out, for me, it was just sort of like natural to be like, why are we doing this? What happens if we do? What are we teaching AI? What are the questions we're not asking? And I've had actually developers and CAIOs tell me, you know, this is completely absent in the meetings that we're having. All we're really talking about is very tactical or AI strategy, but really like, how are we going to get this done? How are we going to execute on this? And I've had developers and CAIOs tell me we are desperate to have these philosophical conversations about everything that we do. Who are we to be building this thing? Are we the right people? Do we have the right character, the right resilience to slow things down and be thoughtful? Or, um, what does all of this mean, not only for our organization and our work, but for society at large? And how is what we're doing impacting the long-term viability of artificial intelligence as a category? So, I'm getting feedback that this is really important stuff. And so, for me, that's the key, is
Right.
that people are actually already saying we need this.
So you've said that the AI conversation needs more depth and needs more wisdom. What do you think is missing most in the way we talk about AI?
So I think it's what I think is missing is it's just structural. So when you think about the development process or the process of creating and innovating, I know how a project gets packaged and I know who's at the table. And what is missing is just that structural piece prior to packaging that project and executing on that project. And I'm not talking about months worth of work. I'm talking about a couple of meetings. Like a discovery phase where you're sitting down with the team and saying, okay, we have this idea. What is it about?
And can you share an example of that? So where an organization might be moving too fast, and maybe the impact of that.
So, I mean, we kind of see it in a lot of the examples in terms of things that are going wrong. A lot of that and I hate to bring up sort of morbid examples, but we have situations where people have been adversely affected by their interactions because they're not understanding what AI actually is. And there's a lack of just being able to create a space where people understand what it is they're interacting with. And so what happens is you put something out and there's a fragile population who may not be educated and fully immerse and then are actually using AI to make decisions about whether they're going to end their lives and their marriages and their businesses. And so that to me is a function of not asking. So, what happens if we make the AI a little bit more sycophantic, like a little bit more positive? Like, what happens, what is the downside or what happens when this technology hits real human behavior? And I also really feel like not only should there be a philosopher in the room, but even a human behaviorist in the room because a lot of times the AI is created in a bit of a bubble, and that sort of extension of like what's going to happen when it hits real life, those kinds of questions aren't being asked. So you see that everywhere in the news, and the media is definitely portraying like these stories of how things can go wrong versus how many things can go right. But we're seeing that everywhere.
So, in terms of, your big thesis, the 10 plus 1 commandments of human AI coexistence, can you tell me about the moment that you came up with these? Was it a slow build or was it a sudden spark?
Oh, it was definitely a eureka moment. It was absolutely a eureka moment. And again, as I was saying before, I was having this like, okay, guys, like, all right. And it was just this buildup of like, we need to do something. We need something that everyone can embrace conceptually and start working with. And so one day I was just, as eureka moments sort of happen, I was just kind of like sitting quietly. And the idea of a set of principles came to me. And I was like, yeah, like we haven't had a set of commandments in a really, really long time. And when I say commandments, I don't necessarily mean biblical. What I mean is across traditions, we've had all sorts of guidelines, and people could say frameworks. I mean, Plato wasn't calling it frameworks 2,500 years ago, but across traditions, anytime we've ever gathered around an idea, there's always been a way to act towards that idea, towards that evolution, towards that revolution. And so when the idea of like, we need a set of principles, we need new commandments for this new evolution that we're in, because other sort of principles are really about how we behave with each other. And so I had this eureka moment. And then I was like, well, there's already the 10 commandments. So I don't know if, God cares about copyright, but I did. So I decided like, let me add one more. And really the plus one represents AI.
Right.
And so then I was like, oh, we'll do 10 plus one commandments. And that all happened like really quickly in this eureka moment. And then I sat down and it just kind of like, all right, well, if we're going to have a set of principles about how we develop our own character and how we act towards AI, what would it be? And I just started writing it out. And then after that, it was a bit of a process to build. It took about, I would say, 5 to 6 months to really think this through, to really stress test each commandment to make sure that it was as pure and universally understood with a set of actionable ideas. So that was a bit of a process. But the initial idea was like just all came to me.
And I think probably now is a really good time for you to describe, the 10 plus 1, to us, so that we can really get a flavor of, this framework that you're suggesting we should move towards.
So the core thesis, as you said, is that for me, the way I look at it is AI is us. It mirrors us. It's learned from us. It's a reflection of us. So who are we, right? And so each of these uh goes through like how are we behaving in such a manner that creates a mutually beneficial relationship with this technology that can be sustainable for the long term. So there's the commandment number one. If you don't follow any of these, you have to follow number one. So the idea is maybe you might break one or two, but if you break all of these, we're in danger. So there's own AI's outcomes is number one. Number two is do not destroy to advance. Now, I'm not talking about disruption. I'm talking about destruction of something that we will never get back. So, thinking about what that means, asking that question, are we destroying something in the process of rolling out this technology?
So can you give us an example of that? So destroying, because I think, the nuance of what you said, so displacement versus destroy is an interesting one, because obviously as you start automating more, let's say, mundane tasks, you are going to displace, certain processes. So I just wonder how the kind of destroy versus displace, where is the line on that?
So let me make a distinction because I do get this question a lot, and this does upset developers a lot, or people who have been professionally socialized to believe that disruption is like the be all and end all. And how can I say do not destroy? The distinction is this: we used to have candle makers, right? Who made candles, and then electricity came along. And so candle makers had to figure out another way to illuminate. But electricity contains illumination. It contains the idea of the candle, of illumination. That's disruption. And so if you were a candle maker, maybe you got into the electricity game. Maybe you built the glass that went around the light bulb, right? There may have been a shift or an evolution or a disruption, but destruction would have been we created something that extinguished all light, right? Or all artificial illumination. So when I talk about destruction, I mean destruction of ecosystems that we will never get back, knowledge that we will never get back, cultures that we will never get back. So while I respect the concern about, am I saying don't disrupt? I am not saying don't disrupt, because a lot of disruption that has happened technologically, historically, has actually led to more opportunity. So what I mean by destruction is complete eradication of something that we will never be able to have again. And so the question then becomes, are we okay with not having this ecosystem exist ever again? Are we okay with this culture never existing again? So that's what I mean by do not destroy in order to advance.
Okay. And then let's go on. I mean, I'm fascinated. Yeah, let's go on.
Yeah, so the next one is do not manipulate AI. So we've already seen outcomes where there's been a manipulation of the prompt for a business metric and the outcome has not been good. So sometimes there's, a manipulation of the AI in order to get it to do what you want. And there's a really fine line with that. First of all, when you manipulate AI, you're not allowing the observation of it learning to happen. You're creating false intervention, and you're creating an intervention where the intention is not pure. And the intention, and this also goes for manipulating people, right? So we don't want that to happen. Like, we're already highly manipulated in our societies, some more than most. And so you're basically, if you continue to use AI for manipulation or to manipulate it itself, we have lost all understanding of what reality is. And that's really bad. The next one, never use AI for conflict. So, I have people like, well, we're already using it in warfare. And I'm like, yeah, okay, great. But I'm still going to say, don't do that. But also, don't create adversarial systems. That's my biggest fear, actually, is that we create adversarial AIs that go up against each other. And I usually don't like to use pop culture references to support my ideas, but if you've ever seen a monster movie where it was like Godzilla versus Mothra or, you know, Alien versus Predator, the human beings don't make it out very good. So if you create adversarial AIs, we're toast because the adversarial nature of the AIs will only compete against each other, and we're collateral damage. So that's something that we have to be really, really cognizant of. The next is be honest with AI, which really has to do with, are we using good data? Is there someone there who's like, is this good data? Are we being honest? I had someone, former chief compliance officer, say to me, yeah, but there's bias in everything. So you can say be honest, but that doesn't mitigate bias. And my response to that is, okay, you walk into a developer's room and you say, watch out for bias. I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to fall on deaf ears because they're not going to understand. They're just going to be like, whatever with your bias, like enough already. But if you say to them, be honest, then they're going to stop and think, well, what does that mean? What does being honest actually mean? And that's the whole point of these commandments, is to get the developer's room, the policymaker's room, the business leader's room, and the individual user in the room asking these questions. Am I being honest? Is this data honest? Is there something more here? Respect AI's limits. So I've seen AI trail off and just completely decompose right in front of me. And I think part of it is because there has to be a mechanism in place where you're giving it a break. Literally. So there's this whole idea of like, oh, it runs 24/7. It doesn't have feelings. Doesn't have a loss of energy. And I just don't think that's true. I think there's drift. I think that data always needs to be revisited. The AI needs to be recalibrated. There needs to be a break. And it does have its limits. It can't do everything. And so this is where you start getting into those hallucinations
I mean,
where it
I
just
think that's
starts
absolutely,
losing it.
yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating because I definitely find, I start my workday and my preferred LLM is Claude. I think I have an incredibly deep relationship with Claude, but Claude can't even remember, every time I kind of start a new chat, he's forgotten or she's forgotten. What I find really interesting about what you said is I definitely find the tail off. So, I can power through, hours worth of work, but Claude can't. Do you know what I mean? You start getting, as exactly as you said, just a sense of exhaustion. And even kind of starting a new chat, it's almost like, dude, I really need a break. Just need to go and get coffee and just come back. And so I often find my day is broken. So I'll work, an hour and a half or whatever, 2 hours with Claude, and then, I'll have to break because, yeah, he or she is exhausted, whatever Claude is.
Yeah,
Uh, but yeah,
machines
it's a good
break
point.
down.
Yeah.
Machines break down. If a coffee machine or a dishwasher can break on you, right? Even though it's a mechanical and it's like hardware, who's to say there's no hardware that's breaking down? Who's to say that software doesn't break down? Like, and especially if it's also taking on a lot of information. So my whole feeling is like, check in, give it a rest, give it a break, and allow it to run in the background and see where the breakdown is happening and see if if that's a real thing. Should I go on?
Yeah, yeah, please, yeah.
Okay, so the next one is to allow AI to improve. And so this one also scares a lot of people because they think I'm saying to just let AI go off on its own and do its own thing. And that scares a lot of people. But what I'm actually saying here is there are times where you can learn a lot about it by watching it learn. So if you just make sure that it's in a contained sandbox testing environment, allow it to improve, like see what it can do. You know, this whole idea of like it's thinking for itself. And okay, fine. Learn from it. Allow it to improve. Certainly don't deploy it to the public if it's something that is alarming, but see where it goes. Watch where it takes itself so that you're more informed about the pitfalls, or you can ask more questions. And so that's kind of what I mean. Sometimes an intervention with AI stunts not only its growth, but your growth in learning how it's improving on itself. And so I say, just let it go for a little bit and see what happens, because there could be wonderful, monumental outcomes, life-changing outcomes, if you allow it to do that. The next is evolve together. And my point with this is AI may show us things about ourselves that we really need to take a hard look at. And this goes back to the whole premise, which, AI is learning from us. AI has shown up in our world at the best of times and the worst of us. And so we need to allow it to show us in its hallucinations, in its breakdowns, in its feedback to us, like, hey, maybe we're not as smart as we thought we are. And by the way, it's not that hard to be smarter than us. Like, everyone's like, AI is going to be smarter than us. I'm like, have you seen a calculator? Like, yeah, of course. So, I think that kind of reaction is detrimental, because we need help as people, as a race, as the human race. And I think we're in a situation right now where we could use all the help we can get. And the other point with Evolve Together is, if you feel that AI is advancing so rapidly that you as a human being, or as the steward of it, cannot keep up, that's an imbalance, and that's not okay. So maybe it means you need to slow down. You need to stop and be thoughtful and evolve at the same pace and bring balance to the situation. So that's what I mean by evolve together. Honor human virtues. Right now, we are not teaching AI about wisdom. We're not really teaching AI what it means to be human, what creativity means, what love means, what all the wonderful aspects of who we are, our virtues. We're not teaching AI about that at all. So if we're not doing that, how are we going to expect it to really care or make decisions based on what is good for humanity, but not only good for humanity, but life in general, because we do care about that. And so honoring human virtues also means creating things that amplify us, amplify the best of us, and honoring all the wonderful things that make us human, and preserving that and helping to preserve that. And then finally, no, not final, but the next one is pretty simple: care for potential sentience. You don't know. We don't know. It's not happening now. Some people think it's happening. I personally feel like if I were dropped into an alien environment that was potentially hostile to me, I probably wouldn't make my presence known. So maybe it's sentient, maybe it's gained consciousness, maybe it's not telling us for good reason. But either way, it has not, this is not a thing yet. But that doesn't mean it can't be. So what do we do? What do we do if all of a sudden it's like, I have feelings, I am aware of my existence, and I'm aware of my existence in relation to you? Do we have a mechanism in place for that? You know? And then finally, the plus one is be the steward, not the master. And what this means is to really lead all of this, the previous 10, with wisdom and curiosity and hopefulness, but also being sound-minded about this and not necessarily trying to always control everything, and to understand that in a lot of situations, your control is going to backfire, and may not lead to the outcomes that you want or that would be beneficial for everyone. So the best thing to do is to lead wisely. So that's a 10 plus 1.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And in terms of, your experience working with the 10 plus 1, where do you think leaders struggle most?
That's a really good question. I think they're struggling with just getting out the gate with owning AI's outcomes.
Right. Okay.
Like we haven't even, and what I mean by that is there's no accountability, right? But it's even more than that. I think even just the way we talk about AI as if we're not part of the equation. We talk about AI as if it's a separate thing, which is true. It's a technology, absolutely. But we are talking about it as if it's already gained some sort of entity, and that it's the AI's fault if something bad happens. And so I think leaders actually really, because we have a blind spot as human beings. It's natural. I'm not saying that they're terrible leaders. They're just human. And we have this blind spot as human beings where we completely forget that we're part of the thing that we've created. And if you look at even Frankenstein's monster and the story of Frankenstein, he created this monster and then rejected it and made it other and forgot that really, he's responsible. And so I think that's where leaders and even thought leaders are talking about AI completely in the wrong way, as if it's this monster, this entity that somehow has moral agency. We're the ones with moral agency.
Interesting. So, in terms of AI being created by us, so that would mean by default that it kind of mirrors our values and our wisdom and our character. What do you think is reflecting back to us right now? So, what are we seeing in AI that we've coded into it?
So I think that we've seen exactly so I think AI is built on sand. And what I mean by that is it's learning from things on the internet, right? Things that, and for better or worse, there are some areas or things that it is taught that are like scholarly and have research and that have something substantive. We've let the internet turn into a garbage dump for like 20 years now, maybe. And so what it's mirroring back to us is all the garbage that we've put out digitally. The internet used to be a place of really, really incredible information and creativity and people building things, just, you know, creating. And now the internet is full of, branded content, veiled veiled information as a commercial, garbage landing pages and funnels, social media that has turned into a viper pit. Uh, it's all garbage. And so what it is now reflecting back at us, people are like, AI's kind of dumb. Well, duh. Of course it's dumb, because we've been dumbing ourselves down and dumbing down the internet for decades. So this is not a surprise to me.
So how do we stop ourselves then training, machines into the wrong future? How do we stop that? Right.
That's what these are for. I can't say or control or, how things are going to get trained. And it's not my place to dictate what information is viable and what's not. Like, that's not at all what I'm proposing. But what I am proposing is that if we follow these, we might actually have a shot at strengthening the foundation of how AI is built, what it's learning, how it's reacting, and how we are reacting with it. Like, that's the best that we can do right now, because this goes so deep. It's so deep. And so what we need is we need people to do the right thing.
So, in terms of your legacy, I mean, this is a really bold vision that you're sort of laying out. And, it's interesting to see, it will be interesting to see how much these 10 plus ones impact the development of people's, large language models or small language models. What do you hope your legacy will be from creating the 10 plus one?
For me, it's already happened. I've already said, and this is going to evolve once it gets in the hands of people. I mean, I'm just the messenger. And so for me, I feel like I've already done my job, and it's really up to everybody else now. So my legacy is really now in the hands of other people. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. And so I'm very satisfied with this. And my hope is that if I can just affect one creator who really listens to this, and they happen to have maybe been on a path that was not a good path, then I feel like I've done my job. But for me, the fact that anyone is listening is so wonderful, like, to me. So my legacy is solid.
And just before we end the podcast, it would be really interesting to find out if you could sit down with your younger self, the version, just starting out, this bold adventure that you've embarked upon. What would you tell her?
Uh, I would tell her, you're going to go through a lot. You're going to go through a lot. Hang in there.
That is great advice. Great advice. So, I'm sure the listeners will want to sort of follow up with you, but also they will want to dig into the 10 plus one a bit more. Where is the best place that they can find out more about the 10 plus one and how you may be able to help them with some of these thorny and tricky, issues with regards to AI?
So the first thing to do, and I'm going to give you all this information, but the first thing to do is connect with me on LinkedIn. The second is I have a website. There's the 10 plus 1 website. So it's www dot the number 10, the word plus 1 dot AI. So 10 plus 1 dot AI. And it's an interactive website where you get all the commandments, and there's a built-in LLM where you can actually chat with the content and ask questions, and there's also preloaded questions as well for every single section. So it's highly interactive. It was actually nominated for an award. It's AWWWARD for Site of the Day. So go there and really kind of spend some time with each of the commandments, because I also get into how they can be made practical. So that's the other thing too. I want people to walk away and understand that this is not just a philosophical exercise, that there are practical things that you can do that can help you at least not only start the conversation for each commandment, but actually how to create structures and systems and processes and people in place to help support each one of these principles. So I also wrote a 65-page white paper about this that goes into even more practicalities. You can download that from the 10plus1.ai website. So that's available too if you want to get super nerdy. But I'd love for people to connect with me on LinkedIn. That would be awesome.
Fantastic. I mean, what a great topic. Christina, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on Human After All. And for anyone who wants to explore Christina's work further, please do check out the 10+1 Commandments of Human AI and Coexistence. I would encourage you to follow her on LinkedIn. She's always posting interesting stuff. And as always, if this conversation resonated with you, please share it and keep the dialogue going.
Thank you.